Hi, my name's Ed Nolan, and my purpose today is to run through the describe and evaluate the methodology used by the behaviourist approach question. The purpose of this is just to give a little bit of extra help if you need it on writing an answer using the plan in front of you. Firstly, when we look at it, let's break down the question. So it's asking you to describe and evaluate. So we've got to do two things. There's two elements and there needs to be a relatively even balance on that. And it's looking at the methodology that the behaviourists use. Now the exam board are suggesting that in this answer really you need to be presenting two or more methodologies. My advice is just to do two rather than three. So we've taught you two methodologies. Now in that you need to have one paragraph which is describing them, and we know our methodologies are laboratory experiments as one and animal research as another. What you need to be able to do is be able to describe both of these methods in one paragraph. That means to be able to give a definition of what they are, and also to be able to give an example and, if possible, a justification of why the behaviourists will use them. So, in answering your question, the first thing that you need to do is just introduce the behavioural approach. Now, one thing that you may want to do, if you're looking for a high-end answer and you're able to do it, is to justify why they use the methods they do. So to state that the behavioural approach takes a scientific route in understanding human behaviour, and so therefore requires evidence that is scientific, and that they wish to establish rules of behaviour, and so therefore that is why they are nomothetic. So there'll be a nomothetic approach. Then also that they favour an objective way to research. So the first bit, if you so wish, this is something that if we're looking at must, should and could, something that you could do is just to justify their approach to research, that it is scientific, nomothetic and objective. Then all students really ought to be describing the laboratory experiments. So what you ought to be doing here is you really need to be giving a definition. And so our definition of a laboratory experiment is on the side there, if you can see that. So our definition, if we look at that there, is this point here, that it is a study where the independent variable is changed and the dependent variable is measured, and this is done in a controlled environment. So, after you've presented that, you may want to give an example. And our example, as you can see, is our Bandura. So I explained that Albert Bandura was a behaviourist and that he conducted a laboratory experiment looking at aggression, learning aggression. And you will identify that his independent variable, so Bandura's independent variable, was obviously the groups that he used, whether the children saw an aggressive model or whether they did not see an aggressive model. And then the dependent variable, and then your dependent variable, as seen on here, is then the levels of aggression measured. So, what have we done so far? You've written a paragraph defining laboratory experiments using an example. You may have put a paragraph beforehand, or at least a sentence or two sentences outlining the approach that they use to gaining research. What should happen next is quite important, because then you move on to the evaluation. It is best that you do this before you look at animal research. You really want to do a good job on this. As you can see, there are just two strengths and two weaknesses that you could use. You may, if you want to look at the could, add additional points. If you are on the must, you must have at least one strength and one limitation of the laboratory experiments. So our first strength is this idea of causal relationships. because the behaviourists control their studies in laboratory experiments, because the extraneous variables have been controlled, you are able to identify causal relationships, that the independent variable does affect the dependent variable. So, for instance, in the Behaviourist study, we know that the model witness is what influenced or caused the changes in behaviour of the children. This is good because you can make predictions. Also, because the studies are well controlled, they can be repeated. And because they can be repeated, we can test for the reliability of the results. The problems, though, come with the artificial nature. Bandura's study was done in a laboratory situation at a university. That means that it was artificial. It was not like the children's normal area of play. And so it doesn't really represent what goes on in real life, in their situation. So it lacks ecological validity. So, our final evaluation point is demand characteristics. Because the studies are artificial, they know they're part of the studies, and because the participants are understanding that the researcher is seeking a certain aim, they try to guess the aim and change their behaviour to match the aim. So it's called demand characteristics. The participants are changing their behaviour to the demands of the study. What this means is that it actually lacks validity, because the researcher is not measuring what they claim to be measuring, but they're measuring how people to respond to experiments. So tracking back, once we have defined laboratory experiments given our example, we really need to present one strength or one weakness, preferably two, where we explain what the problem is and why this is a problem. Then we move on to animal research. We do exactly the same. Now remember, when we're looking for animal research, the definition is really quite simple. The definition is research done on animals. But what we need to do is to put in a justification. And our justification is here. So if I just put that there, and I've run out of space. So our justification is that humans are not really different in the way that they learn to other animals. It's just that we have a quantitative difference, i.e. our brains are bigger and different. Our brains are larger, and so therefore we learn more. But in essence, we learn the same way. That's an important point to make. Then you go on to your evaluation, which can be that it can be applied to humans. So we need to use an example. A good example to use, I think, is, and I'll just put that there, is operant conditioning. Just put con. And the idea that operant conditioning, research done by Skinner, has been applied in education with the merit point system. Then another strength is demand characteristics. Now, they don't have no demand characteristics because some animals do respond differently to an artificial environment, but there are less because the animals cannot guess the aim of the study. So these are two strengths that can be used to support the use of animal research. However, the limitations. As we know, this term here is extrapolation. And that's an interesting and big word. But what that means is, if we look at extrapolation, is can we take what an animal does, there's a rat there, and can we apply it to humans? Because humans, as well as having a deformed head, humans are more sophisticated, they have higher order cognitive abilities such as reasoning, which animals don't have. So can we really, are humans as simplistic as animals? The last one is ethics, and this idea that the ethical issues are we harming animals? Do animals really wish to take part in this research? Is it ethical to carry out research on animals? So in essence, in order to write this answer, what you need to be able to do is be able to describe the laboratory experiments, be able to give at least one evaluation point for and against, be able to describe animal research and justify why, and give one example for and against. What you should be doing is putting examples for both of those studies in there and putting in another evaluation point. What you could do is justify, as we said right at the beginning, why they take these approaches by putting additional explanation on your evaluation points, and that will get you a good mark. Well, good luck.